All right, Catch Aid's heavy metal picker here. I've got an embarrassing story for you involving George Corpsegrinder Fisher, which takes place Thanksgiving Day 1996 at the Sub Galley in Dayton, Ohio. Cannibal Corpse was headlining. Openers included Immolation, Brutal Truth, a band called Leveled from Piqua, Ohio, a great one album wonder, and Drogheda, which was a grindcore band from somewhere in Northeast Ohio. I had approached George for an interview, got the interview, got on the bus, watched Jack and Paul smoke some weed, and we got to our interview. Now, what happened to that interview? It was on a tape, and I'm sure I lent it to a friend and didn't get it back, or it was one of those tapes that did not survive the trip from Austin to Columbus when I, like an idiot, sent a big package of materials via media mail, some of which were irreplaceable and got lost. Ugh. And so I don't know what happened to this interview. So anyhow, one of the questions that I asked George, I was familiar with the 1993 Hammer Smash Face EP, really good stuff on it. And I said, tell me about this song, The Exorcist. And he goes, oh, that's a Possessed song. And I immediately thought like, oh, because at that time, I'm 19, the internet's a brand new thing. I'd never heard of, I've heard the name Possessed, but I didn't know any of their songs, didn't know any of their albums. And George says, yeah, that's the first death metal band, the song Exorcist. And that's a song that Cannibal did prior to my joining the band. It's a really good song, but we don't really want to play covers live. And I thought, okay, that's understandable. And I thought, Jesus Christ, I really need to do my homework after this. And I was familiar with the name Possessed, and the reason for that was when I started getting into death metal, you can't look up everything on Encyclopedia Metalum, you can't look up everything on Wikipedia. So prior to this, in order to get information, we'd buy a magazine called Metal Maniacs, and you have to go to like a specialty bookstore or whatever to find this Metal Maniacs, which I think was put out by Century Media. And it had like some of the same employees from Century Media who'd be writing the articles. Every time there was a Century Media band, they'd always give it a good review. And on every single like top 10 death metal albums list, you'd see familiar names like Cannibal Corpse and Deicide and Morbid Angel, but they'd always have what you call the precursors of death metal, which would be Venom, Celtic Frost, Hellhammer, and of course Possessed. And at the time, you wouldn't hear Possessed on the radio. I wouldn't have heard Possessed. I wouldn't have seen any videos. And being that I was kind of young, there was no way for me to have been exposed to Possessed music. So around this time, I was hanging out with a band called Foul Stench from Dayton. Pretty cool. And I asked these guys, like, they're a little bit older than me, a little bit more aware of the scene. And I'm saying, hey, I've read all these, read all these top 10 lists of all these great bands, but I've never heard Napalm Death Scum and stuff like that. And he's like, oh, yeah, come on over to my house. We'll hang out and listen to all these old albums. And so that was where I got my first taste of like Celtic Frost and Venom and, Napalm Death Scum and stuff like that. We listened to Bathory as well. And prior to this, I'd never heard Death, Scream, Bloody Gore, or Leprosy. At the time, I think I'd only heard Individual Thought Patterns and Symbolic, because that was what was new and what was popular at the time. And if I made the 45-minute trip to the record store and they didn't have what I was looking for, I was just shit out of luck. That's how you went about doing this before there was the internet. So George himself has said that Possessed was the first death metal band. I tend to agree. Now, as far as timelines go, Death, when there was Montas, the pre-death band with Cam Lee, I guess Cam Lee may have been doing death metal vocals prior to Possessed's existence. So some people say Death is the first band, although Seven Churches by Possessed was the first death metal album. I believe that Seven Churches was the first death metal album prior to Necrophagia, prior to Scream Bloody Gore by Death. And after having listened to Welcome to Hell by Venom, Venom single-handedly gave birth to death, thrash, and black metal. If you listen to the first albums of Exodus, Metallica, Megadeth, and Slayer, you can definitely tell they borrowed quite a bit from Welcome to Hell. And you could say the same thing for Possessed. You could say the same thing for Bathory. They just took what Venom was doing and took it further in a different direction. And even though Venom had an album called Black Metal, I wouldn't call them black metal. What we initially believed to be black metal by modern day standards would start with Bathory, in my opinion. Now, even though they identified as black metal, we don't play this identify as shit in heavy metal. Metallica had a demo called Power Metal. Does that make them a power metal band? Who was the first power metal band? I don't know. I don't really give a shit about power metal, the genre. So there you have it. At least George was kind enough not to embarrass me and say, "Oh my God, you fucking poser. You don't know what Possessed Seven Churches is." He just said it without a beat and gave me a nice, honest answer to my question. So there you have it, guys. Give me a comment whether you agree or disagree.